على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وما خلقت الجن والإنس إلا ليعبدون. صدق الله العظيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I hope everyone is well and in the best of health and iman, inshaAllah ta'ala. So as you remember last week, we initially had started the course where we spoke about various points, the introduction, about the author, my connection to the actual book and how I received the knowledge, and some other points in relation to the brief history and introduction to certain terms and terminologies that we came across, inshallah. Today we're going to go and dive more into the meatier bit of the topic where it will introduce those parts to us, inshallah, that will help us to familiarize ourselves more with the topics such as the dots and the vowels and the people behind them. For those of you who've just logged in, if you notice on the WhatsApp group, I sent the biographies of some of the personalities that we will be referring to quite often. One of them being Abu al-Aswad al-Du'li, another one Khalil ibn Ahmad al-Farahidi, and then another one Yahya ibn Ya'mur al-Laythi, and so on and so forth. So please do take the time out to read them, just so you're familiar with who they are and what impact they had on the actual science of Rasam itself. Barakallahu feek. Bismillah, brother, if you start from here.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The introduction of dots. The word naqt in Arabic means to draw dots, and technically it means to write diacritical points or marks. Nukta means one dot, and its plural is nukat. There are two types of naqt, naqt al-i'jam and naqt al-i'rab. Naqt al-i'rab was used for the short vowels, that is dhamma, fatha, kasra, and for the absence of a vowel, that is sukoon, and for nunation, that is tanween. In the beginning, dots were marked on the top, bottom, behind, or in the front of words to denote the short vowels on words. Naqt al-i'jam refers to the dots used on letters to distinguish between those letters that have identical shape.
So the first point that we've come across here is Naqtul I'rab. So here it's clarified singular and plural and so on and so forth. So this is actually referring to the vowels. Naqtul I'rab, Naqtul I'rab is referring to the vowels, and Naqtul I'jam is referring to the actual dots. But we'll familiarize ourselves with that terminology as we go along. So here, as it says naqt, this refers to diacritical points or marks. That point should be absolutely clear. Please remember that. And then two types, naqtul i'jam, naqtul i'rab. I'rab for short vowels. So this is a word that you'll come across quite often in a lot of English books. You'll also come across in other sciences. So instead of what we call dhamma, fatha, kasra, or what some people in the South Asian context would refer to as pesh, zabr, and zir, okay, or elsewhere around the world, the word vowels is used. And then you have sukoon, okay, which is another one. Then you have nunation, which is tanween. So the double fatha, double zabr, double dhamma, which is double pesh, double fatha, which is double zabr, and double kasra, which is double zir. Okay, so just familiarizing yourself specifically with what this is. And then i'jam, as it says here, dots to distinguish between the shapes of the letters. So something which I will give later for homework, inshallah ta'ala, because I want to see how well you've picked up on this, because it's good to have some kind of exercise as well. So these are 2 points that we need to know. Okay, naqtul i'rab and naqtul i'jam. and they will be explained in due course. One point that I did want to clarify here is, as I said last week, that the science of Rasam is reverse engineered. So all of these points that we see in terms of the actual standardization came a lot later by the different scholars. You had Abul Aswad ad-Du'li who done it first, and then later on that was changed into a different format, a different standardized structure by Khalil ibn Ahmad al-Farahidi, and you will see exactly how they done that and what impact they had as we go along, inshallah. Okay. So this is something that happened later after the time of Sahaba. It wasn't affected by any external influences. So the skill set of the Arabic language was a must in this whole process, as you will come across in due course. We're coming across an incident now where Abu Aswad ad-Du'li actually started it, but he didn't exactly agree at first. So you'll come across the actual incident which caused this to come about. Okay. Bismillah, brother Zishan.
The history of Naqtul Arab. During the Khilafah of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he wrote to Ziyad, who was the governor of Basra, summoning his son Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad. When he returned upon Muawiyah radiallahu noticed that he was erring in his speech. On this, Muawiyah radiallahu wrote to the Ziyad reprimanding him on his son erring in speech. Ziyad sent for the well-known scholar of the time, Abu Aswad al-Du'ali, and said to him, "These non-Arabs have distorted the Arabic language. Why don't you create something through which people can correct their speech and accurately recite the word of Allah?" Abu Aswad declined and went away. Ziyad was not one to give up. He asked a person to sit in the path of Abu al-Aswad and deliberately recite the Quran incorrectly. When Abu al-Aswad passed by this person, he heard him recite the first verse of Surah Al-Baqarah incorrectly, in a manner that would mean that Allah has nothing to do with the polytheist and his prophets, when it should be Allah and his prophets have nothing to do with the polytheists. Abu al-Aswad found that repugnant and said, "Allah is above, have nothing to do with his prophet," and right away returned to Ziyad and accepted his request and said that he will begin with the Arab, Dhamma, Fatha, Kasra, etc. of the Quran. He asked Ziyad to send him 30 scholars so that he can choose one of them to help him in his cause. Ziyad sent 30 scholars to him, and Abu Aswad continued to test them until he chose one scholar who was from the tribe of Banu Abdul Qais. Abu al-Aswad.
Okay, Jazakallah khair, brother. Barakallahu feek. May Allah bless you. So here the story starts. The history of Naqtul I'rab. One point to note that among the scribes of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Muawiyah ibn Sufyan radiyallahu ta'ala anhu was amongst those foremost scribes. You had many other scribes, Zayd bin Thabit, Muawiyah ibn Sufyan, Ubay ibn Ka'ab, and so on and so forth. Okay, and one thing you will come across is what impact they had on the whole process, how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would get his students to write down the words as he would dictate them, and what part of their expertise came into action at the relative times. So this was very important. Abu al-Aswad ad-Du'li, his biography I've sent on the WhatsApp group, so please do refer to that. He was a great grammarian and someone who's a direct student of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So Abu al-Aswad ad-Du'li was a student of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, the great Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Ali ibn Abi Talib. And amongst many, he was known as a master of knowledge. Many Sahaba gained knowledge from him, to the point that in our Friday sermons, we come across that he was amongst the master of many Sahaba. So just like you get certain individual qualities of other Sahaba, one of the qualities of Ali radiallahu ta'ala, that he was a fountain of knowledge and amongst the most knowledgeable of the Sahaba. And Abu al-Aswad al-Du'li was his direct student. And you can see here that just by reciting or changing a dot, a line, or a diacritical mark, depending on the context, how the meaning can change. So studying this science is fard kifaya, meaning kifaya in terms of fiqh or theology, as we understand it, Islamic theology, is someone amongst the community must study this so that they can then later carry on teaching this knowledge to the next generation. For example, you have performing janazah salah. This is fard kifaya, to perform, meaning it's fard, it's a duty, but if at least 1, 2, or 3 people perform it, then this will fulfill the collective responsibility of the community on those people. In the very same way, Tasheel Rusum or Rasam is a science which is fard kifaya. It must be studied. And as long as there's a few amongst the community who are studying and passing this knowledge on, that's absolutely fine. So that's one point to know, inshallah. Okay.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Salam.
Al-Bara'a incorrectly in a manner that would mean that Allah has nothing to do with the
Sister,
polytheism.
could you, sorry, apologies, could you just read from here? So we've read this part. You could start from here, please, inshallah. Barakallahu feek.
Abu al-Aswad said to him, grab the Mus'haf and some ink of a color different from the color of the Mus'haf, and listen carefully to me. Whenever you find me opening my mouth while reciting a letter, place a dot on top of that letter. And when you see me rounding my lips, place a dot in front of the letter. And when you see me lowering them, write a dot. When you see me lowering them, write a dot underneath the letter. As for when you see me following up with a gunna sound, noon sound as in tanween, write 2 dots instead of 1, appropriately. As for the letter without a vowel, which is a sakin, leave it without dots. Every time a page was completed, Abu al-Aswad would double-check it with him until they completed the whole Mus'haf likewise. Scribes during the time of Abu al-Aswad and thereafter continued to follow suit, and some made slight changes to the dots. Some adopted a small square in place of a dot, some adopted a small fold in a circle, and some adopted a small unfold circle. The people of Medina introduced the breve, the mushaddad letter, and the makron for sukun. This is how it was until the end of the Umayyad, Banu Umayyah leadership. Later dots were
Jazakallah khair, sister. Barakallahu feek. Okay, so as you can see, a significant process. So what's beautiful is many of us are students of the Qira'at, and this description shows beautifully how important the science of Qira'ah is, meaning there is an aspect of theory, but the biggest foundation in the sciences of the Qira'at and Tajweed is watching how the teacher reads and the student follows, or when the student reads and how the teacher is affirming or correcting, and so on and so forth. So what's unique about the science of Qira'ah and Tajweed, Qira'at more so, is that when you read, it's from teacher to student all the way till our current day. And that's the way it was done, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to Jibreel alayhi salatu salam, to Rasul Arabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, to the other Sahaba, to the Tabi'een, to the Atba'u Tabi'een, and scholars in later generations. So the unique act of reading and checking. So therefore, those who are memorizers of the Quran, those who are trying to read the Quran regularly, it's not just a matter of doing the memorization or checking, but it's about revising. Because sometimes we make mistakes, we need to check. So in the very same way, you have this process of reviewing and checking. And then these sort of processes lead to the great process of a contemplation and thinking about the meaning of Allah. But here, as you can see, what's so unique, again, opening my mouth, rounding my lips, lowering the lips, and so on and so forth, and how accurate Abu al-Aswad ad-Du'li was in his process. So something to really keep in mind, and something to remember, that this process in itself was a very, very particular one. Umayyad dynasty, so as you know, after Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, you had the four Khulafa Rashidun, okay, Al-Mahdiyun, whom among the many scholars regard as the rightly guided caliphs. After that, you had the Umayyad dynasty. So you had Muawiyah radiyallahu ta'ala an, Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, and many of the great people who came later. But people who were part of the Umayyad dynasty. And again, here they're just introducing some of the changes between the Madani Mus'haf and the South Asian or the South African Mus'haf. So, for example, for Sukun, for example, in the South Asian Mus'hafs, you had like a boomerang indent, whereas in the Madani Mus'hafs, it was slightly different. So again, already you can see how they're slowly and steadily introducing change for the different places. Could we have our next reader, please? Jazakallahu khair.
Later dots were introduced to distinguish letters from their lookalikes. Naturally, this caused confusion between the two sets of dots, dots for the harakat and dots for the letters. Also, it was becoming tedious for many to write the Quran with one color ink and the dots with another color. Hence, during the Abbasid period, a scholar by the name of Khalil ibn Ahmad al-Farahidi introduced a diacritical system quite different and more elaborate than the one introduced by Abu al-Aswad. Instead of dots, he used the letter from which each of the short vowels is created. But in a much more diminutive shape, he also introduced the shape Hamza for the letter Hamza. The diacritical marks he introduced were 8. Number 1, Fatha, a mini alif horizontally placed above the letter. If a noon is to be added as in tanween, then 2 horizontal alifs. Later on, the alif or alifs were written diagonally. Number 2, kasra, a mini ya in the shape of that's on the which later lost its arch and became like a horizontal alif under the letter. This would be doubled if the letter was nunated tanween. This later was written diagonally as well. Dhamma, a mini waw placed on top of the letter. This would be doubled in the case of tanween. This was written diagonally later on. The scholars of Al-Maghrib, the West, removed the circle part of the waw for the dhamma, thus making it look more like a slanted dal. Sukun or jazm, a small meme without the tail on top of the letter, alluding to the meme in the word jazm. In some cases, the head of the letter jim would be placed on top of the letter to allude the jim in jazm. The dot of the jim was later dropped. Number 5, tashdid or shadda. A small letter sheen would be placed on top of the letter, the semicircle part, and the dots were later dropped.
Barakallahu feek, sister. Allah bless you. Subhanallah. So again, you can see Abu al-Aswad ad-Du'li, he was using different inks, different letters. So to 1 point here, or you can put it 1 into 2, there were dots which were there to distinguish the letters. Okay, so as it said here, dots were later introduced to distinguish letters, and then there were dots to distinguish the harakat, the vowels. So the fatha, kasra, and dhamma. So do keep that in mind. In some of the script of the Quran, the earlier scripts, you will see dots top and bottom, forward and backward. So dots were used for 2 purposes. Sometimes to clarify the shapes of the word, okay, meaning one letter which had a dot and the other that didn't, and to distinguish between the vowels, the fatha, kasra, dhamma. So if a dot was on top, it would refer to a fatha. If a dot was on the bottom, it would refer to a kasra, so on and so forth. One of the biggest discussions, which really is very unique, is the discussion of Hamza in itself, because Hamza really is very much discussed in the topic of Qira'at and Tajweed, and has got a lot written on it by many scholars. Khalil ibn Ahmad al-Farahidi, he passed away in 170 AH, meaning after Hijri. So among the letters which had dots there already was ba, da, and tha, and how that came about as well in a more structured form we'll find out later. But there were some letters which didn't have dots. And one point which was clarified last week, that in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba more so, there was the usage of dots in the age of ignorance, which we refer to as the time of Jahiliyyah, but it wasn't readily used because the great Arabs would consider it as an insult, not because that it wasn't allowed to be used, but the level of proficiency in the Arabic language was such that it was seen to be an insult or below one's grade if it was used. But there is some trace of dots in the earlier generations or in the age of ignorance. So fatha here very quickly, mini alif. Okay, so as we see an alif, noon is to be added as in tanween. So tanween, as we know, so one is that we've got the double fatha, for example. So a double fatha will equal as a alif with a fatha on top and then the noon as a sakin. Okay, so an. So every tanween that we come across, a double fatha, double zabr, double kasra, double zir, double dhamma, double pesh. Another way of writing it was the respected letter with a noon sakin. Okay, so that's where we get the noon coming in, for those of you who are not familiar with that. And then later on, we have a concept of standing fatha, kara zabr. Okay, for those of us in the South Asian context. Kasra again, mini ya. So you can see how diacritical marks are developing from letters, which is really unique. You'll see this shape in the Quran, but it lost its arch, meaning this top part here lost its arch, and it was then doubled. So this arch here was taken off. It would remain a single line, and then it was doubled when it was tanween, meaning double fatha, double kasra, double dhamma, double zabr, double zir, double pesh. Okay, but later on, it was used diagonally for a standing kasra, okay, or karizir, as some of us know it in the South Asian context. So you can see that all the signs and the differences that we've seen between the Madani and the South Asian Mus'haf and other Masahif around the world, there were very, very unique reasons for why or how things developed. So that I'm just, again, emphasizing that at this moment. Mini wow. Again, in the case of tanween, a wow was doubled. Okay, this was written diagonally later on. So specifically, those people who follow the South African or the South Asian Mus'haf, when I mean the South African Quran or the South African Mus'haf and the South Asian Mus'haf pretty much is the same. You will find maybe, for example, the Bangladeshi Mus'haf, which is slightly different. It has some similarity with the Madani Mus'haf and so on and so forth. So the South Asian Mus'haf, the ulta pesh or the upside down pesh or the upside down dhamma, as they call it, or reverse. So reverse or upside down dhamma, you'll see it as a 6. Okay, so initially it was a 9, but it turned the other way as a 6. Okay, but in as it says here in Al-Maghrib, or the people of Maghrib, it wasn't quite that. They maintained the 6 shape. So when we refer to the Maghrib, as it'll come later, is not Al-Maghrib as what we understand as the West. It refers to North Africa and Spain. Last week, I emphasized a lot of the scholars of Islam, and I mentioned the example of Imam Malik and how many of his great students and the famous Mufassir, the Quran commentator, Imam al-Qurtubi, who came from Cordoba, Cordoba in Spain, and how that links back to Spain itself. So Spain has a very rich heritage of Islam. So again, something to read upon, inshallah. If I find an article, I'll ping it on the WhatsApp group, inshallah. So when we say West, that's what we refer to. But later, the circle part was taking off, making it look like that. But it's like this more so in the Mus'haf used by the West and elsewhere. But in the South Asian Mus'haf, the Dhamma is not like that. It's basically a 9. It's been turned around. Here again, as you can see, small meme without the tail. So this kind of stop. You've seen this in the Quran as well. It's noted as a jazm. So one difference here is modern Arabic and Fusha, classical Arabic, what we see. So in classical Arabic, you'll see the usage of this jazm or sukoon, whereas in the Quran, you may not see that. It's slightly different. So as I said, in the South Asian mushafs or the South African mushaf, you see as a bit of a boomerang. Okay, but there again, what was unique that it was a meme, but the tail part, the bit that was going down, was taken off, but it was indicating towards jazm. So jazm is spelled as jim, za, and meme. Okay, so jazm, jim, za, and meme. So when we mean that this shape here was a jazm, sorry, it was a meme, and the tail's been taken off, so that was indicating towards the meme as it was spelt in Arabic. So when I say jazm in English is J-A-Z-A-M or J-A-Z-M, but in Arabic is jim, za, and meme. So the meme is what made this sukoon here, but they just took the tail off. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Tashdeed and shadda, another one. You've got the semicircle of the sheen. So you got 2 semicircles and then you got a big semicircle. But the 2 semicircles was used for tashdeed. Yeah, but the big part was later taken off. So in some of the mushafs, you see the tashdeed, or what one of my teachers used to call WD-40. So WD-40 was almost like a super glue application. You would put that on and it would stick hard. So a lot of the reciters of the Quran, when they come across tashdeed, or what I call W, it really emphasizes that the letter must be pressed, but not too much. So for example, if you're reading iyaka, you don't want to read it in a way where it's iyaka. There's no pressing of the tashdeed, or iyaka. You know, some people or some reciters, you find them press so much that becomes unnatural. Like iyaka na'budu wa iyaka. So too much emphasis. So there's got to be a slight push. So iyaka, and of course, our shuyukh can detail that further. But the point to highlight is the actual shadda. Okay, so I'm going a bit more detail here, but it's just again to emphasize what it is. If we could have our next reader, please. Barakallahu feek.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, sister.
Number 6, Hamza al-Qat. The head of the letter Ain, reduced in size, was used to represent Hamza al-Qat. Sometimes it would be on its own, sometimes on top of alif, sometimes underneath it, sometimes on waw, and sometimes on ya, depending on the circumstances. Number 7, Hamzat al-Wasl. The head of the letter Sa'd was placed on top of alif to allude that it is connected with the word before it. This sign is not used in the South Asian prints of the Quran prevalent today. Number 8, Mad. The word Mad was written on top of the letter to be stretched. Later, the circle part of the meme and top part of the dal was removed to form, I forget the name of that sign. Laqat al-Ijam. Although diacritical points for letters existed during pre-Islamic times, they were rarely used. They were not incorporated in the earliest manuscripts of the Holy Quran. During the reign of Banu Umayyah, under the leadership of Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan, the 5th Umayyad Khalifa, it was feared that due to non-Arab integration, the Arabic language would lose its original essence and beauty, and hence lead to distortion in the recitation of the Quran. Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan ordered Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, the governor of Iraq, to rectify the situation. Hajjaj ibn Yusuf asked Nasr ibn Asim al-Laythi, the student of Abul Aswad al-Du'ali, and Yahya ibn Ya'mur al-Adwani, both from the Tabi'een, to take care of this. So, both of them devised a convention that distinguished the letters with the same shape from one another. The first thing they introduced was the dots for ba, tha, and tha. They placed one dot under ba as it was the first letter, two dots on tha as it was the second letter, and three dots on top of tha as it was the third letter. Then they placed the letters that resembled one another in pairs and left the first one without a dot and placed one dot on top of the second, as in Ra, Za, Dal, Val, Sad, Dot, Sin, Shin, Ta, Wa, Ain, Ghain. Thus, the Hijai or Alif Bai order was created.
Barakallahu fik, Sister Mehmet, bless you.
Jazakallah.
So Hamzatul Qat. So this is something that we come across quite often in the field of Qira'ah and Tajweed, Hamzatul Qat and Hamzatul Wasl. And one thing which is really unique about the field of Qira'at and Tajweed, that the Arabic language has quite a bit of an emphasis, but where the two clash, we will always give priority to the transmission of what we received through student to teacher, going backwards all the way to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So be absolutely clear that in the sciences of Qira'at and Tajweed, the emphasis and the point of transmission is the most important. But sometimes what we will find that science, Arabic language, and many other things add a beautiful emphasis and explanation to some of the sciences that we study today, such as Tasheel al-Usul. Another thing, so Hamzatul Qat is basically that Hamza, or shape of an alif, or just read as written as a Hamza sometimes, which is actually part of the word. Okay, that's one point. Hamzatul Wasl. Wasl means join or to join, so joining two words together. So that Hamzatul Wasl is something that comes in between words as a temporary measure, because a word cannot start with a sukoon. So, for example, Rabbil Alameen. Okay, if I don't read Al-Alameen with Rabb, because Rabb, the ba, has a sukoon initially, Rabb, and Al-Alameen, the lam, has a sukoon. Okay, so you got two sukoons. So in the qira'ah, the general reason is that when you got two sukoons together, they can't be read because it creates difficulty, what we call in Arabic thiql, difficulty. So therefore, the Arabs were very keen to exercise certain rules. So some of us who have studied nouns and verbs, known as nahwa and sarf, you will appreciate some of these points where certain changes were made. So when you've got two sukoons together, whether it's in one word or separate words, here it's talking about separate words, it creates difficulty in recitation. So therefore, what we do is we introduce a temporary Hamza as an alif. Okay, I'm just mentioning that loosely at the moment, but we will draw more accuracy to that later on. So it can be read. So you won't say l, alamin, l, alamin. Very difficult. So therefore, al alamin. So the Hamzatul Wasl comes in, a temporary measure. So when we say Hamzatul Wasl, it means a Hamza which comes at the beginning of a word temporarily to ensure that the word can be read without any difficulty. And Hamzatul Qat is that which is at the beginning of words. So it talks about the head of the letter Ain. Very interesting. Hamza was made, subhanallah. So again, you can see the thinking behind each concept. And sometimes it was put on top of alif, waw, and ya. This you'll see more in the Madani Mus'haf. So the Mus'haf of Medina, or some of the Masahif that are used in the Arab countries, what you'll find is on the alifs, they put the Hamza. So we won't call them alifs, they will be known as Hamza. Sometimes you'll see the Hamza separate, which is more so in the South African or the South Asian Mushafs. Okay, so you find that slight difference. Hamzatul Wasl. So again, more so in the Madani Mushaf, you'll see the head of the Sad. But again, in the South Asian Mushafs, is not used. Okay, so again, you can already see there's differences. So to highlight what is a Hamzatul Wasl, in the Madani Mus'haf, you got the head of the Sad here, but in the South Asian or the South African Mus'hafs, you won't see that. Again, mud as well. Used to see it like that, but the circle part of the meme was taken away and top part of dal was removed to form this. So you'll see this sign in some Mus'hafs as well. Okay. Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, 5th Umayyad Khalifa, to draw a bit more clarity to that. Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, a very, very notorious personality, someone who had done some beautiful things in the history of Islam, but also done certain things which weren't of a grade or nature which the Muslims could draw reference from. But nevertheless, many scholars of Islam or the Muarrikhin, the historians, draw reference to the point that Hajjaj ibn Yusuf was one of those very few people who created or initiated the concept of dots. But here you'll actually see how that situation actually has differed. Bata and Tha. Again, I mentioned that earlier. Dots were there on these letters already, but how did it come about? Ba being the first one. So 1 dot on that, 2 dots on Ta being the second, and Tha being the third one. So, putting 3 dots on that. So how unique, and subhanAllah, look at the thinking behind how they're putting the dots. So as we see it today in the Qaida, the primers that we use to train ourselves in preparation for the Quran, you'll see everything there, but the thought process, the history behind it, we're seeing it here. And then all of these letters, how they would give the dot to one and not to the other. Subhanallah. So again, this is something to keep a note of, Hijai order or Alif Bai order. So Alif to Ya, as we see it today, in context, is known as Alif Bai order or Hijai order. Okay, we'll come across some other names as well, but please do keep that in mind. Very important point, because we're going to come across other different orders as well.
As for the letter Sheen, it was feared that it may create confusion between its medial form and Noon's medial form. So they placed 3 dots horizontally on it, 1 on top of each tooth, and the 1 on top of each tooth of the 3 teeth, upwards facing small lines of the letter Sheen, and the Mus'hafs printed in the West, North Africa, and Spain region. Till today, the letter Sheen has 3 dots placed horizontally on the Sheen, while the East letter unchanged this to 3 dots placed in a triangular form on top of Sheen. As for the letters Jim, Ha, and Kho, they decided to place 1 dot in the middle of Jim, 1 dot on top of Kha, and nothing on Ha. As for Fa and Qaf, they decided to keep 1 dot for Qaf on top and 1 dot for Fa at the bottom, keeping in mind that the bottom part of both letters was the same. The Mus'hafs of Maghrib even today follow this convention for Fa and Qaf. The East letter on top, the East later on adopted the convention of 2 dots on top for Qaf and 1 dot on top for Fa. As for Sad, Dad, Ta, and Da, in their medial forms, they decided to add an extra small tooth after Dad and Sad, as in Dad and Sad, and a longer one on top of Da and Ta, to alleviate confusion. Between Ta and Sad and between Da and Dad, the long tooth on top of Da and Ta was initially slightly closer to the middle. In some traditional books, they will add the adjective Da and Ta after al-mushala after Da and Ta, which means the one with an extra line on top.
Barakallahu feek. Jazakallahu feek. So again, something which came about more so in the time of Uthman radiallahu ta'ala. And so in due course, we come across the collection of the Quran. So we had the era of Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala an, which is referred to as the Jam', Jeen Mim Ain, Jama'a, which in Arabic means to collect. So we have the Jam' of Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala an, and then we have the Jam' of Uthman radiallahu ta'ala an, and how both eras differed in relation to their challenges and in relation to their priorities. So in the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala an, and after, what you will find up until the time of Uthman radiallahu ta'ala an, that there were different challenges, and one of the biggest challenges was the actual collation. The issues wasn't in the different dialects, whereas in the time of Uthman radiallahu ta'ala an, you had that. You had, and this is where the convention, or what we would call the canonical recitations, the different ways in which the Quran has been recited and how it's been passed on and how it's been mastered and preserved from student to teacher all the way till today came about in a more academic form. So here again, as you can see, North Africa and Spain have been referred to. When it talks about medial, it means middle. Okay. So as for the letter Sheen, okay, they didn't want to draw confusion between Noon, because Noon has got a bit of a semicircle, and Sheen's got semicircles as well, but it has got a big semicircle which looks exactly the same as a big Noon. Okay. So what they done was they removed the big, as it says here they removed the big semicircle and left the two semicircles, but they wrote it in a way where it had 3 dots in one line, as it says here. In the Mus'hafs printed in the West and North African Spain today, they have 3 dots placed horizontally, whereas in the South Asian Mus'hafs or the South African Mus'hafs, you'll see it's more like a triangle where you got 2 dots and 1 dot on the top. So already one difference that in the context of Sheen that you should come across, that if you come across some of the Masahif of Africa, North Africa and Spain, what you will see today is on Sheen, the dots will be like this in the straight line. But the other Masahif, the South Asian and the South African, 3 dots, and you'll see that more so in other places. Again, Jim, Ha, Kha, very clearly how it's done. Fa and Qaf, how it was the same, and then how it was changed. Again, beautiful really in how things have been differed. So 1 dot for Qaf on top and 1 dot for Fa at the bottom. So again, dots were used for 2 primary purposes. Number 1, to differentiate between letters. Number 2, to differentiate between the shapes of the words of the Quran. Here, they're showing the differentiation between the letters. Okay. Mus'hafs of Maghrib, which again refers to Spain and North Africa, use this convention, but the East changed. So East and the West. So East means South Asia and elsewhere, adopted dots on top and clarified that accordingly. Okay. Al-Mushala again here, Al-Mushala or Al-Mushala, but Al-Mushala is referred to. You can see how dots were introduced. So here, for example, again, medial forms. An extra tooth was added for Sad and Dad. So we just came across that Sad itself here was introduced to highlight Hamzatul Wasl, that temporary Hamza which was used so that words could be read properly. So instead of reading a word with a sukun at the beginning, which was impossible or difficult, it was given a Hamzatul Wasl alif. Okay. In some mushafs, you would have the small Sad or the head of the Sad to clarify that. But later, when they standardized it, that tooth came along. Okay. Some people prefer to say tooth. There are other words as well, but don't confuse yourself. In the Lugha of Urdu, there's different terminology, and in English, you'll come across different points as well. But again, just reference to how these letters developed as we went along. Okay, could we have our next reader, please?
Inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Kaf and Lam in their initial and medial forms looked alike. and the sign that resembled Hamza was placed on the top of Kaf to distinguish it from Lam. Later on, the line of the Kaf was slanted and the sign became a slanted line as well. Some Musaf today still have the antique method of writing Kaf. From the above, we can conclude the following. The first good innovation to take place in the Musaf Usmani was the insertion of dots to denote the short vowels, and its innovator was Abul Aswad al-Du'li. This was later replaced by the convention introduced by Khalil ibn Ahmad al-Farahidi. Early manuscripts did not have dots for every single letter, rather only for those letters for which correct recitation was required. Point number 3. The second good innovation was the introduction of dots to distinguish letters. Its innovators were Nasr ibn Asim and Yahya ibn Ya'mur. Point 4. The dots for the short vowels were innovated before the dots for the letter. Point 5. Initially, the dots were written in a different color. This was gradually abandoned after the introduction of Khalil diacritical system. The following diagram shows the evolution of the diacritical system taken from Quran manuscripts with Kufi Khat from the 9th to 11th centuries.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Zishan. May Allah bless you. So again, we carrying on with how things were developed between Lam and Kaf. So again, medial form. This is during or in the middle of words. It can be at the beginning potentially as well. But again, we can see how that's developed. Hamza was on top of Kaf. So a lot of the qa'idas that we read, initially the Kaf didn't look like that. But to differentiate between Lam and Kaf, an S shape, which is what I use to explain to younger students, to show the difference between Lam and Kaf, and then obviously how it became a standardized point. And then obviously you see how this comes about. So what's beautiful is that the Arabic letters in written form, when they're by themselves, how it's written is different. When they're joined up to other letters, how the shape changes, and how throughout history that was facilitated to make it easy for other Muslimin to read the Quran. So again, here you can see the S shape. So again, small things, you know, at certain places, certain tooths were added, at certain place, certain things were put in like that, like a small S, or certain things were borrowed from other letters and so on and so forth, and they were standardized. But then the usage of a certain letter or its dots differed between different mushafs. So again, really important. So when we refer to the word mushaf, again, the question could come up that what do we mean by mushaf? Because does it mean the Quran? Does it refer to the revelation? There are different opinions among scholars. Generally, on a general note, when we refer to mushaf, we refer to the wording of the Quran. So when we say Al-Quran Majid or Al-Furqan Hamid or Quran Pak, as we see in the South Asian context, and so on and so forth, mushaf is exactly the same thing. Some scholars have used mushaf as the words that were revealed from the Quran. So you will find more of this information in the books of tafsir, Quranic translation and explanation. But these points here really just standardize everything that we've come across. So Mushaf Uthmani, so again, the collation of the Quran in the time of Uthman radiallahu ta'ala an, insertion of dots to what? Denote short vowels, fatha, kasra, dhamma, and so forth. Innovator was Abul Aswad. Convention was replaced by Khalil Ahmad. Early manuscripts did not have dots. Point to note, did not have dots, although it was there, but it was not used regularly. The second good innovation, introduction of dots to distinguish letters. Okay. Nasr ibn Asim al-Laythi, and Yahya ibn Ya'mur al-Adwani. Again, key names. Dots for short vowels were innovated before the dots for letters. That's something to point out. So I said that dots were used for two purposes. One was to distinguish between vowels, fatha, kasra, dhamma, and so on and so forth. And one was to distinguish between letters. So the dots for short vowels, fatha, kasra, dhamma, came before the dots for letters. Okay. We come across a few manuscripts. So here we've got the word Kufi Khat. So for those of you who are doing calligraphy, or those of you who are thinking of calligraphy, the actual style or the font of the Quran is a science in itself. So Islamic calligraphy. So we look at the mosques or masjids, or when we look at the way how it was written, the style or the font, you'll find it differs from masjid to masjid, from academic references to another, and so on and so forth. So Kufi Khat is a type of calligraphy. Okay, I will send a document later, inshallah, to clarify what is Rasmul Khat and so on and so forth. So here, as you can see, you know, you've got different points here. Could we have our next reader, please? Jazakallah khair.
Early 9th century CE script with no dots or diacritic marks. Also see diagram number 1 for 7th century expert in Kufic script. 9th to 10th century CE under the Abbasid dynasty, Abu al-Aswad system established 3 dots with each arrangement or position indicating a different short vowel. Later, a second system using black dots was used to differentiate between letters like fa and qaf. Also see diagram number 2 below. 11th century CE in Al-Farahidi system, the system we know today. Dots were changed into shapes resembling the letters to transcribe the corresponding long vowels. Also see diagram 3 below.
Okay, Jazakallah khair, sister. Allah bless you. So again, this is something more for reference, which inshallah will allow you to look over in your own time. But for example, when we talk about the shape of the Quran or the rasam, this is what we're referring to, shape of the word. Okay, I'm going to send a homework later, inshallah, for you to do, inshallah, and I'm going to see how you do that, because one is your talaqi, your understanding, how you grasp concepts, but the other is how you put it into practice. So that's what I would like to see. So I'm just highlighting this now, the shape of the Quran. So this is key to your homework. Number 2, as you can see, it says here, Abul Aswad, red dots, indicating different vowels. So kasra for red dot at the bottom, fatha for red dot at the top, and so on and so forth. Okay, as you can see. Third one, black dots to differentiate between fa and qaf. This is number 3. Okay, I don't see any black dots here, but system was introduced nevertheless. Sorry, diagram below. So here we are, diagram. Okay, here, diagram number 2. So qaf, as you can see, the black dots there, and yeah, far here, if I'm not wrong. So far, so you can see black dots were introduced. Qaf, black dots were introduced. Okay, diagram number 2 on page 20. And then you've got Al-Farahidi system, diagram number 3. Over here. Okay, this was Al-Farahidi system, but let's just go back to what his system actually was. The system that we know today. So exactly as we see in the Quran today, that was Al-Farahidi system. Dots were changed into shapes resembling the letters. Okay. Dots were changed into shapes. So although the shapes were already there, but the point of using dots. So in Abu al-Aswad al-Farahidi's time, Abu al-Aswad al-Du'li's time, you had dots to indicate the vowels and so on and so forth. And then dots were also used to indicate the differences between letters. But in Khalil ibn Ahmad al-Farahidi's time, he had dots which were then changed. Why? Because instead of dots, you had vowels which were shown. So the system that we had today for Fatha, Kasra, Dhamma is pretty much this. So this is really an earlier form of what we see today. Okay, so the system that we have today in the Masahif around the world is the convention of Khalil ibn Ahmad al-Farahidi, where you have the shapes of the letters and you have clear diacritical marks, whether it's dots or squares or lines to indicate the vowels. Okay, whereas in Abu al-Aswad al-Du'li's time, it was very, very different. Okay, inshallah ta'ala. We will stop here. We will carry on from the sequence of the Arabic alphabet, page number 22, inshallah ta'ala. Can I ask everyone to ensure that they are reading the portions every week? That's very important. Number two, what we've done in lesson, please ensure that you go over it, because what is really important is that you need to have something to refer back to. But if the subject knowledge is not present consciously in your mind, it becomes very difficult to draw a connection between what is mentioned and what you're trying to connect it to. Otherwise, it'll just seem like a white blank of paper. You're reading, but it's not connecting. So first things first, please make sure that you do your reading every week. That has been mentioned in the document. Number two, please make sure that whatever we've done in lesson, to go over it once, if not twice, every week. And other than that, what will happen is, inshallah, you will find that as we go along, a lot of the concepts which you might have a 50-50 or an 80-30 or, you know, 40-60, 80-20, whatever percentages, they will clarify as we go along, inshallah ta'ala. I'm just checking, are there any questions at all? I believe some of them have been answered. Please ensure